Riley Adams had been invisible for 3 years. The quiet woman who served breakfast at 0600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800 to the Navy SEALs at Forward Operating Base Griffin. She wore a hairnet, kept her head down, and never said more than, "What can I get you?" to the operators who came through her line. When the hostile assault team breached the base perimeter and zip-tied her SEAL team brothers, Riley didn't scream like the other kitchen staff. Instead, she calmly removed her apron, reached under the industrial freezer, and pulled out a weapon that made the nearest terrorist's eyes widen in terror. That's when everyone realized the mess hall cook wasn't who she appeared to be. Forward Operating Base. Griffin sat like a concrete fortress in the harsh landscape of eastern Afghanistan, its walls rising from the desert like a monument to American military presence in a region that had seen too much war. The base housed 300 personnel, but its crown jewel was SEAL Team 7, 12 of the most elite warriors in the United States military, men who disappeared into the night on missions that would never appear in official records. Riley Adams, 29 years old, had been working in the mess hall for exactly 3 years, 2 months and 16 days. Staff Sergeant Riley Adams, 75th Ranger Regiment, had once been one of the most promising soldiers in the Army's elite airborne infantry. She'd completed Ranger School at the top of her class, earned expert marksman qualifications with 7 different weapon systems, and had been selected for the most challenging special operations assignments the military could offer. The transformation from elite warrior to mess hall cook hadn't happened overnight. It had begun during her final mission as an active ranger, an operation in Syria that had required her to eliminate a high-value target who turned out to be younger than she'd expected. Much younger. The successful completion of that mission had earned her commendations and offers for promotion, but it had also shattered something fundamental inside her that couldn't be repaired with medals or recognition. Riley had requested transfer to non-combat roles, citing personal reasons that her commanding officers respected without requiring detailed explanations. Warriors who'd given everything in service to their country deserved the right to step back when they needed to. She'd been assigned to food service at FOB Griffin, where her military training was still valuable for logistics and organization, but where she wouldn't be required to make life or death decisions about other human beings. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. Riley found peace in the routine of feeding people instead of fighting them. She took satisfaction in seeing SEAL Team 7 well-fed and ready for their missions, knowing that she was supporting their operations without having to participate directly in the violence that was their profession. It was honest work, necessary work, and it allowed her to sleep at night without the dreams that had plagued her during her active combat years. SEAL Team 7 had accepted her presence with the casual indifference that professional warriors showed toward support personnel. They appreciated good food and reliable service, but they didn't ask personal questions or probe into backgrounds that people clearly wanted to keep private. To them, Riley was simply Mom, the cook who made sure they ate well and who could be counted on to have hot coffee ready whenever they returned from missions. The team leader was Commander Jake Harrison, a 15-year veteran of naval special warfare who'd earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and unshakable calm under pressure. At 38, he was old enough to understand that not everyone who served in support roles was there by choice, and wise enough not to ask questions that people might not want to answer. His second-in-command was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chen, a weapons specialist who could make any firearm sing with deadly accuracy. Chen had noticed things about Riley that others missed, the way she moved through the kitchen with tactical awareness, how her eyes constantly scanned for threats even while serving food, the fact that she kept her back to walls and always knew where the exits were. But Chen was also smart enough to recognize a fellow warrior who'd chosen to step back from the fight, and he respected that choice without comment. The rest of the team included specialists in demolitions, communications, medical support, and close-quarters combat. They were all consummate professionals who'd served multiple deployments and understood that everyone at FOB Griffin was there for a reason, whether that reason was public knowledge or deeply personal. What none of them knew was that Riley's daily routine included more than just food preparation. Every morning at 04:30, before anyone else was awake, she would conduct her own private inspection of the mess hall's security protocols. She knew the location of every entrance, every potential choke point, every piece of equipment that could be weaponized if necessary. Under the industrial freezer, wrapped in waterproof plastic and hidden behind cleaning supplies that only she ever accessed, was a cache of weapons and equipment that she'd assembled over 3 years of careful acquisition. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Riley had learned during her combat years that violence could arrive without warning, and that survival often depended on being ready for possibilities that other people never considered. She'd hoped never to need those preparations, but hope wasn't a strategy that kept people alive when everything went wrong. On the morning of October 15th, everything went wrong. Riley was in the middle of preparing breakfast for the base when the first explosion shook Forward Griffin's outer perimeter. The blast was distant enough that most personnel initially dismissed it as routine ordnance disposal or training exercises. But Riley's combat-trained ears immediately identified the sound as incoming rocket-propelled grenades, and her tactical mind began calculating threat vectors and response times before the second explosion confirmed her assessment. The base alarm system activated 30 seconds later, filling the air with the distinctive wail that signaled "Condition Red, enemy contact, all personnel to defensive positions." Through the mess hall windows, Riley could see soldiers running toward predetermined defensive positions while officers shouted orders and coordinated response protocols. But something was wrong with the pattern. The explosions were coming from multiple directions simultaneously, suggesting a coordinated assault by forces with detailed knowledge of the base's defensive layout. More concerning was the fact that the attackers seemed to be targeting specific facilities rather than conducting random harassment fire. This wasn't opportunistic terrorism, it was a professional military operation. Riley continued preparing breakfast while monitoring the developing situation through the windows and listening to radio chatter from security personnel. Her years of combat experience had taught her that panic was more dangerous than enemy fire, and that maintaining normal routines could provide crucial stability during crisis situations. But internally, her mind was processing tactical information and preparing for possibilities that the base's regular security protocols might not have anticipated. The third wave of explosions was different, closer, more precise, targeting the base's communication equipment and power generation systems. Riley watched through the kitchen windows as systematic destruction eliminated Forward Griffin's ability to call for reinforcement or coordinate with higher command. Whoever was attacking the base knew exactly how to isolate it from outside support. That's when she saw the infiltration. Moving through the smoke and confusion of the ongoing bombardment, figures in dark tactical gear were penetrating the base perimeter through sections that should have been impregnable. They moved with military precision, using proper cover and advanced techniques that spoke to extensive training and combat experience. These weren't local insurgents or opportunistic fighters. They were professional soldiers conducting a carefully planned operation. Riley counted at least 20 infiltrators in the first wave, all armed with modern weapons and equipment that suggested significant financial backing and logistical support. They were advancing toward specific targets within the base, including the command center, communications facility, and her blood ran cold as she realized their pattern, the SEAL Team 7 barracks. Through her kitchen window, Riley watched in growing horror as the attackers systematically surrounded the building where her team was housed. SEAL Team 7 was trapped inside, caught off guard during what should have been routine downtime between missions. They were the most dangerous men on the base, but they were also outnumbered 4-1 and caught in a tactically disadvantageous position. The battle for the SEAL barracks lasted exactly 7 minutes. Riley timed it by the kitchen clock while she watched America's most elite warriors make their last stand against overwhelming odds. The SEALs fought with the professional skill and coordinated tactics that had made them legendary, but they were facing an enemy that had prepared specifically for this engagement and brought superior numbers and positioning to bear. One by one, she watched her boys fall. Not killed. The attackers were using non-lethal weapons, suggesting they wanted prisoners rather than casualties. Commander Harrison was the first to go down, struck by what appeared to be a tranquilizer dart while attempting to coordinate his team's defense. Chief Chen lasted 30 seconds longer, managing to eliminate 2 attackers before being overwhelmed by the remaining forces. Within 10 minutes of the initial assault, SEAL Team 7 had been captured and was being systematically zip-tied and prepared for transport. Riley watched through the kitchen window as the men she'd fed for 3 years were dragged unconscious toward vehicles that had appeared as if from nowhere. Professional kidnapping, executed with military precision against the most dangerous special operations unit in the American military. The base's regular security forces were dealing with their own problems. The coordinated assault had been designed to overwhelm defensive positions, while the real operation, the capture of SEAL Team 7, proceeded without interference. By the time base security realized what had happened, the SEAL team was already being loaded into vehicles for transport to whatever location their captors had prepared. Riley stood in the mess hall kitchen, watching the vehicles disappear into the Afghan landscape, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. For 3 years, she'd been Staff Sergeant Riley Adams, retired, a woman who'd chosen peace over war and found satisfaction in supporting others rather than fighting herself. But watching her team being taken prisoner by enemy forces had awakened something that no amount of kitchen duty could put back to sleep. She removed her hairnet and apron with movements that were calm, deliberate, and absolutely deadly in their implications. Underneath the industrial freezer, her hands found the waterproof case that contained equipment she'd hoped never to touch again. The weight of the tactical knife felt familiar in her hands, as did the compact pistol and the equipment that would allow her to track and engage targets in hostile territory. For the first time in 3 years, Staff Sergeant Riley Adams was back on active duty. The transformation was immediate and comprehensive. The woman who walked out of the mess hall kitchen bore no resemblance to the quiet cook who'd entered it that morning. Riley's posture had changed, her movements had acquired the fluid precision of a predator, and her eyes held the cold focus that came from making the mental transition from protector to hunter. Her first priority was intelligence gathering. The attackers had been too well informed about the base's layout and defensive protocols for this to be a random assault. Someone with detailed knowledge of FOB Griffin's operations had provided information to enemy forces, and that meant there might be additional security breaches that needed to be identified and contained. Riley made her way to the base's communication center, moving through smoke and confusion with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. The facility had been damaged but not destroyed, and she was able to access emergency communication protocols that allowed her to piece together what had happened. The assault had been precisely timed to coincide with a shift change in the base's security rotation, creating a 40-minute window when defensive positions were undermanned and coordination was at its weakest. The attackers had used that window to penetrate the perimeter, neutralize specific targets, and extract their primary objective, SEAL Team 7, before effective resistance could be organized. More troubling was the intelligence that had made such precision possible. The attackers had known not just the base's physical layout, but its operational schedules, defensive protocols, and personnel assignments. That level of detailed information could only have come from someone with authorized access to classified material. Riley accessed the base's personnel database and began cross-referencing access logs with the timing of the assault. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. Someone at FOB Griffin had been providing information to enemy forces for at least 6 months, creating the intelligence foundation that had made the successful capture of SEAL Team 7 possible. The traitor was Lieutenant Colonel David Marsh, the base's executive officer and the person responsible for coordinating security protocols. His access to classified information was comprehensive. His knowledge of SEAL Team 7's operations was detailed, and his financial records showed deposits that corresponded to significant intelligence breaches over the past year. But identifying the traitor didn't help Riley rescue her captured team. For that, she needed to track the vehicles that had taken them and determine where they were being held. Fortunately, her years of combat experience had taught her that professional kidnappers always had contingency plans, and those plans usually involved secure facilities that could be identified through careful analysis. Using the base's intelligence databases, Riley began mapping known enemy safe houses and operational facilities within a 50-kilometer radius of Forward Griffin. The attackers would need somewhere secure enough to hold 12 elite American prisoners, isolated enough to avoid detection, and well-defended enough to resist rescue attempts. That significantly narrowed the possibilities. 3 locations met the criteria: an abandoned mining complex in the mountains northwest of the base, a former Soviet military installation to the east, and a series of cave systems that had been used by various militant groups over the past decade. Riley analyzed each location's tactical advantages and disadvantages, considering factors like defensibility, escape routes, and the logistics of holding prisoners. The mining complex was too exposed and lacked adequate defensive positions. The cave systems were too difficult to access with vehicles and wouldn't provide the kind of secure holding facilities that professional kidnappers would require. That left the Soviet installation, a facility that had been abandoned for 20 years but retained the infrastructure necessary for a sophisticated prisoner operation. Riley's next challenge was more personal. She needed to decide whether to wait for official rescue operations or attempt a solo extraction mission. Standard military protocol called for coordinating with higher command and waiting for properly equipped and supported rescue teams. But Riley's tactical analysis suggested that such operations would take days to organize, and intelligence indicated that SEAL Team 7 was scheduled for transport to a more permanent location within 24 hours. The decision was made easier by her knowledge of the men who'd been captured. Commander Harrison, Chief Chen, and the rest of SEAL Team 7 were warriors who'd spent their careers rescuing others from impossible situations. They deserved the same level of commitment and risk-taking that they'd shown for countless others throughout their service. More pragmatically, Riley understood that she had tactical advantages that conventional rescue operations would lack. She knew the captured SEALs personally, understood their capabilities and likely responses under stress, and could coordinate with them in ways that outside rescue teams couldn't match. Her years of cooking for them had given her insights into their personalities, their decision-making patterns, and their individual strengths that could prove crucial during a rescue operation. Riley spent 2 hours preparing for the mission, assembling equipment and supplies from her hidden cache and from base resources that she could access without triggering security protocols. Her loadout was carefully chosen for a solo operation against a heavily defended facility. Lightweight weapons with high accuracy, minimal equipment to maintain mobility, and specialized tools for breaching defensive positions. The Soviet installation was located 30 kilometers east of Forward Griffin, accessible through mountain terrain that would provide concealment, but would also slow her approach. Riley's plan was to conduct reconnaissance during daylight hours, identify defensive positions and guard rotations, then execute the rescue during the pre-dawn hours when human alertness was at its lowest. The approach to the target facility took 6 hours of careful movement through hostile territory. Riley's combat training allowed her to move undetected through terrain that would have been impossible for civilian personnel, but even her skills were tested by the challenges of solo operation in enemy-controlled areas. The Soviet installation was larger than intelligence reports had suggested, with multiple buildings and defensive positions that indicated significant ongoing use by hostile forces. Riley counted at least 30 enemy personnel during her reconnaissance, all armed with modern weapons and exhibiting the kind of discipline that suggested professional military backgrounds. The facility's security was oriented toward preventing escape rather than preventing infiltration, which gave Riley tactical advantages that she could exploit. The guards were focused inward, watching for attempts by prisoners to break out rather than scanning for external threats. Their patrol patterns were predictable, and their communication protocols had gaps that a skilled infiltrator could use. More importantly, Riley's reconnaissance confirmed that SEAL Team 7 was being held in the facility's central building, a reinforced structure that had once housed Soviet communications equipment. The building was heavily guarded, but followed a predictable rotation schedule that would create opportunities for a skilled operator to gain access. Riley's assault began at 0300 hours, when human alertness naturally reached its lowest point and guard rotations were most vulnerable to exploitation. Her approach was methodical, professional, and absolutely silent. One by one, she neutralized perimeter guards, using techniques that left them unconscious but alive. She was conducting a rescue operation, not a revenge mission. The central building's security was more challenging, requiring Riley to use skills she'd developed during her most classified operations. Electronic locks, motion sensors, and communication systems all had to be defeated without triggering alarms that would compromise the mission. Riley's technical training allowed her to bypass these systems systematically, creating a corridor of access that led directly to where her team was being held. She found SEAL Team 7 in a large room that had once been a communications center. All 12 men were conscious, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, but otherwise unharmed. Commander Harrison looked up as Riley appeared in the doorway, and his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to professional respect in the space of 3 seconds. "Riley?" he whispered, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and growing understanding. "Staff Sergeant Riley Adams, 75th Ranger Regiment," she replied quietly, already moving to cut his restraints. "I'm here to take you home." The extraction from the facility required every skill that Riley had developed during her special operations career. Moving 12 recently freed SEALs through hostile territory without vehicles or air support was a tactical challenge that tested her leadership abilities as much as her combat skills. But SEAL Team 7 was composed of elite professionals who understood tactical situations and could adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. With their restraints removed and their tactical awareness restored, the SEALs transformed from prisoners into hunters. Riley's rescue mission became a coordinated assault by 13 elite warriors against an enemy force that had been expecting to guard prisoners, not fight a full-scale engagement with America's most dangerous special operations personnel. The battle for the Soviet installation lasted 45 minutes and ended with the complete destruction of the hostile forces that had captured SEAL Team 7. Riley's careful reconnaissance and precise assault had created the conditions for victory. But it was the combined skills of all 13 operators that turned a rescue mission into a devastating defeat for the enemy forces. Commander Harrison approached Riley as the team prepared to return to FOB Griffin. "I need to know," he said quietly, "who exactly I've been having cook my breakfast for the past 3 years. Riley looked at him with the calm expression of someone who'd made peace with her past and her present. "Someone who wanted to feed people instead of fighting them," she replied. "Someone who discovered that sometimes you don't get to choose which role you play when your people need you." SEAL Team 7's debrief took 6 hours and resulted in classified reports that would influence special operations doctrine for years to come. Riley's performance during the rescue mission earned her offers for immediate reinstatement to active duty with any special operations unit in the military, along with promotions and assignments that would have represented the pinnacle of a special warfare career. She declined them all. "I'm not ready to be a full-time warrior again," she told Commander Harrison during their private conversation. "But I'm also not going to pretend that I'm just a cook when my people are in danger. Maybe there's a middle ground somewhere that works for everyone." The solution came from an unexpected source. The military's special operations community had been developing programs for personnel who could operate in civilian environments while maintaining their readiness for crisis situations. Riley's combination of skills, her proven ability to blend into support roles, and her demonstrated willingness to act when necessary made her an ideal candidate for such assignments. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Riley Adams was assigned to a classified program that placed former special operations personnel in support roles at military installations worldwide. Her official position was food service supervisor, but her real mission was to provide security oversight and crisis response capabilities for high-value military personnel. She was still cooking breakfast at 600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800. But now she was doing it with the full knowledge and support of commanders who understood that sometimes the most effective protection came from guardians who looked like everyone else. SEAL Team 7 continued their missions with the confidence that came from knowing their base was protected by someone who'd proven willing to walk through enemy fire to bring them home. They still called her Mom, but now it was said with the respect due to a warrior who'd earned her place among them through actions rather than words. Riley found peace in the balance between her two identities. She was the cook who made sure America's elite warriors were well fed and ready for their missions. She was also the guardian who watched over them with skills that could turn from protective to deadly in seconds when circumstances required it. The kitchen at her new assignment was larger than the one at Forward Griffin, serving a broader range of special operations personnel from multiple branches of the military. Riley approached her duties with the same methodical precision she'd brought to her combat missions, ensuring that every meal was prepared properly and that every warrior under her care was ready for whatever missions awaited them. Under the industrial freezer, wrapped in waterproof plastic and hidden behind cleaning supplies, was a cache of weapons and equipment that she hoped never to need again. But hope wasn't a strategy that kept people alive when everything went wrong, and Riley Adams had learned that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat was having the right person in the right place when the impossible became necessary. Late at night, when the kitchen was quiet and the base was secure, Riley would sometimes stand at the windows and watch the stars over whatever country she was serving in that year. She thought about the choices that had brought her to this place, the balance she'd found between the warrior she'd been and the guardian she'd chosen to become. She was invisible again, but it was a different kind of invisibility. Instead of hiding from her capabilities, she was using them to protect others in ways that no one would ever fully understand. She was living proof that the most effective warriors weren't always the ones carrying weapons in the front lines. Sometimes they were the ones serving meals and watching over their people with quiet strength and unshakable dedication. The men and women who came through her food line might never know that the cook serving their breakfast was also their most reliable protector. But Riley Adams knew, and that knowledge gave her a sense of purpose that no amount of recognition or promotion could have provided. She had found her place in the world, not as a hunter or a victim, not as a warrior or a civilian, but as something more valuable than either. She was the guardian who watched over guardians, the warrior who protected warriors, the invisible strength that kept America's most visible heroes safe and ready for whatever battles awaited them. And if the day ever came when her people were threatened again, when the impossible became necessary and the unthinkable became reality, Riley Adams would be ready. Not because she wanted to fight, but because she'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love was being willing to become dangerous for the people you'd sworn to protect. The kitchen would always be there when the battle was over. But until then, she would be whatever her people needed her to be. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names never appear in the history books, whose actions remain classified long after the wars they helped win are forgotten. Riley Adams was living proof that heroism doesn't always announce itself, that strength doesn't always come with uniforms and medals, and that sometimes the most effective protection comes from guardians who look exactly like everyone else. She was the cook who could become a weapon, the supporter who could become a warrior, the invisible guardian who watched over America's most visible heroes. And in a world where threats could emerge without warning and safety was never guaranteed, that combination of skills and dedication was more valuable than any weapon in the military's arsenal. Riley had learned that some stories were better left untold, some skills better left unspoken. Her greatest achievement wasn't the classified missions or the lives she'd saved in dramatic firefights. It was the quiet breakfast conversations where stressed operators found a moment of peace, the hot meals waiting after brutal training exercises, the steady presence that reminded America's warriors that someone cared about them beyond their tactical value. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought by people whose names never appear in the history books, whose actions remain classified long after the wars they helped win are forgotten. Riley Adams was living proof that heroism doesn't always announce itself, that strength doesn't always come with uniforms and medals, and that sometimes the most effective protection comes from guardians who look exactly like everyone else. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.